Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear learner, I welcome you in this course, Research and Publication Ethics. Today, we will be discussing something on the idea of publication misconduct, its forms, definitions, and types. I will be using text, namely On Being Scientist, for discussing some specific case studies on fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism issues. My name is Dr. Nirbhay Kumar Mishra. I am an assistant professor at Institute of Applied Sciences and Humanities at GLA University, Mathura. Before we move further, let's try to recap what we did in the last session. So, we talked about publication practices, we analyzed the importance of publication guidelines, we discussed some of the case studies to understand publication ethics in research practices. We analyzed the guidelines of COPE and WAMI, and in the end, we critically understood the guidelines through some case studies on publication ethics. After this session, learners will come to know about the idea of publication misconduct, its definition, forms, and types. We will be understanding authorship issues and major publication misconduct issues like fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. We'll try to understand an interesting, publication misconduct, which is known as helicopter research. It's a kind of ethical violation. Researchers will come to know about it. Then learners will also understand what are the causes, or what are the motivational factors why researchers are attracted to commit some publication misconduct. Then we'll try to understand, researchers will come to know about the implications, impact, and results of publication misconduct. In the end, we'll try to understand no misconduct strategies, and we'll try to discuss some specific case studies to analyze this publication misconduct issues. So today I will be using a text On Being Scientist for our case study discussion in the end of this lecture. So learner will come to know about these all ideas from this lecture. So let's try to understand what is publication misconduct. Simply, it means violating standard norms of publication practices and ethics. It involves unethical behavior of either researchers or reviewers or editors or publishers in the forms of scientific misconduct in the publication process. So, when we talk about publication misconduct, we primarily talk about falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism in the research. But there are other instances also, we can talk about the publication misconduct. They are like ghostwriting, selective reporting, misrepresentation of data or data manipulation, salami slicing, duplicate publication, overlapping in the publication, or redundant publications. They all are the instances of publication misconduct in research practices. So let me recall what we have already discussed, but let's take a brief to go ahead with this idea of publication misconduct. It is necessary to understand how it's closely associated with scientific misconduct. Okay, so scientific misconduct includes three things: falsification, fabrication, plagiarism. Falsification is about when we tamper with the data. Okay, what is not the case? Okay, we falsified the real data in terms that we misrepresent or manipulate with data or make certain changes in the data, or sometimes intentionally we omit some important data so that we can take advantage in our manuscript by omission of the data, right. So using other data, research or data without due credit, okay, without acknowledging and proper citation, as we all know, is called plagiarism, okay. So plagiarism is always using the other's resources without giving due credit to that author researcher. So fabrication, what we did in the fabrication, okay. So in the fabrication, we have to understand that it is about the fabricating with the real data, okay. So observations versus filling out. Sometimes there are different observations, but we try to fill out so that we can publish our paper. There are more chances that research will be accepted. So we play with the data, we tamper with the data, we assume certain data. So we have to understand there is a data set which is a real data set, and there is a data set that we play with the data, we tamper with the data in order to prove certain hypotheses, or in order to attract publishers, researchers, and research community sometimes. So these three cases are basically are the instances of publication misconduct. So let's try to understand how the US National Science Foundation mentions three kinds of misconducts. So according to them, fabrication is making up results and recording or reporting them. This is sometimes referred to as dry labbing. Let's try to understand what is the idea of dry labbing. Look, dry labbing means if a scientist is giving certain results in the manuscript, but he or she has never observed those results in the laboratory, or those experiments are not actually done in the labs. They are simply written by the fabrication, okay, in the paper. So that's called dry labbing, okay. Without having proper experimentation, you just make the experiment, okay, make the data available in the manuscript, okay. So a more minor form of fabrication is where references are included to give arguments the appearance of widespread acceptance, but are actually fake or do not support the argument. So sometimes what researchers do, they simply take the arguments and they just give reference, okay. Sometimes they take argument from the other without citing them. These all cases, I mean are misconduct cases, and it is about fabricating. You are just using the argument for the references, but those arguments are not supporting proper inference of the idea that you want to establish in your manuscript. So we have to understand how it differs. Falsification differs from that of fabrication. So falsification is actually manipulating with the research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. So let's try to understand about the plagiarism. Okay, so plagiarism is, of course, is using the others idea, others resources, other any kind of data. You can take graph, images, okay, you can take table, you can simply take the arguments, okay, or results, methods you can copy, and you don't cite, you don't give due credit, proper credit to that researcher, and you use for your own convenience, and you take your own credit, although we should give the proper credit and we should cite properly, and we have discussed in the earlier lecture also how to make the proper due citations in the paper, so to avoid plagiarism. Okay, so plagiarism is always appropriation of another's work, ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. One form is the appropriation of the ideas and results of others, and publishing as to make it appear the author had performed all the work under which the data was obtained. So we have to understand a subset of plagiarism is citation plagiarism. Okay, what is citation plagiarism? Okay, sometimes it's a negligent, okay, failure of a researcher, okay, not appropriately citing the the arguments, or the citing the proper resources, okay, giving them due credit, or sometimes not doing a proper bibliography in the manuscript, okay, or sometimes it's known as citation amnesia also. You just forget to cite, okay, and you use that resource in your paper, okay. So sometimes you just don't regard those old researchers, those who have already established those theses and ideas in the in that area of research, and you don't cite them. So these all forms of plagiarisms are a kind of misconduct. We have to understand this forms of misconduct. Okay. So now let's try to understand about the very interesting idea which is known as idea plagiarism. Okay, that's a very important discussion. So what is idea plagiarism? Look, it's in the research community. Okay, researchers, okay, those who conduct research, there are reviewers, okay, those who reviews, okay, and there are editors who edit. Okay, there may be some thesis supervisor, we can say. There are supervising theses, or there are supervision committees. Okay, we can say they supervise some experiments. Okay, in all ways, before publication. Okay, these are cases of before publication. They all members can go through someone's research. They can understand someone's idea, and in some cases, it is the case of misconduct if any of the member they utilize those ideas in terms of writing a different research paper, different manuscript, and they use the idea of another without giving due credit. Okay, that would be a case of idea plagiarism, and that's a worst form of misconduct, I would say, because you just take the idea before publication and use it in different manner without giving proper and due credit. So we should understand that idea plagiarism is a worse kind of plagiarism. So going ahead, we have to further analyze the plagiarism, fabrication, and self-plagiarism cases. Okay, so in the case of plagiarism, fabrication, a researcher uses images, tables, or any piece of research data from already published work and represent as a new data to support his research work. That's an interesting case. Okay, you just copy the data and table and use in your paper to represent your own ideas and thesis to publish the paper. Okay. And self-plagiarism is the case when the researcher submits the same research work to multiple journals at the same time using different titles, or in some cases, same work is sent for publication in different languages. Okay, so in both cases, I mean, it commits, a researcher commits self-plagiarism. Now, so we have to understand these three gears of publication misconduct. Okay, they are like engine. Okay, that are taking further this kind of misconduct activities in the research practices. So plagiarism and falsification and fabrication, we can say, they are three gears in the vehicle, okay, to carry this publication misconduct practices in the research practices. We should avoid these practices as they are really worst for science and the scientific community. Okay, so let's try to understand the idea about the publication misconduct in the context of authorship issues, although we have discussed in the earlier lecture. So let's just take a brief about it. So what kind of misconduct we commit in the case of authorship? So first, we like gift authorship, right? When we simply include the name of any author, okay, we want to please someone to take some further benefits, okay, or some kind of pressure you feel any senior person. Okay, so you just simply gift the authorship without any credit. Okay, that researcher has not done anything, but you just simply include the name. That's a gift authorship. Ghost is the case when a researcher has contributed in the paper, in the manuscript, but his or her name is not in the paper. That's called ghost authorship. That's very popular in medical field when professionals, they write medical papers for the others. Okay, guest, of course, we have to understand the case where somebody is very influential in research area and you use his or her name in order to influence the chances of your publication. It can increase the probability of your successful publication. That's why you involve the name as a guest author, right? Now, we just try to understand the cases. In publication misconduct, when we go through the cases, we find that the most of the cases in the medical field are the cases of image manipulation, where researcher, what they simply do, they copy the images and they try to fabricate with the data, okay, in terms of contrast, light effects. Sometimes they use even chemicals also, like glycerin also, to to show some kind of difference, so to prove their points in the paper. So image fabrication is really serious issue in the medical researchers also, and it is also research integrity violations. Okay, we have to understand the idea of research integrity and how we violate it. Okay, so we have to understand the respect for science. Okay, science has established principles. Okay, based on that principle, researchers they disseminate new knowledge in the research community. So when we use these kind of techniques, okay, image manipulation or fabrication with the data, falsification, or when we use plagiarism also, okay. So what we do, we in some sense undermine the science. Okay, that's the disregard to the science and the scientific community, and that's really the worst case in the research practices. So let's try to understand further misconduct in terms of selective reporting. Okay, when a researcher use certain parts which are useful for his thesis or paper in the manuscript. Okay, so what they do, they they use some unwanted inferences. Okay, they use some deceptive graphs and figures. Sometimes they don't give full explanation. They simply give minimal answer so that nobody can actually understand the fabrication. Okay, in terms of selective reporting. Okay, sometimes they use suggestive language, not clear language, to explain the facts. Okay, and sometimes they communicate the data in a very deceptive manner. These all cases, they are the cases of selective reporting. Further, we see that when they present the data in not fully or accurately, okay, they just try to argument like that they have the desirable results. Okay, so through the data. Okay, so what they do, they keep all the desirable results and they remove what is undesirable from the manuscript. In this all cases, what they do, they are very selective to use the data, fabricate with the data, manipulate with the data, or tamper with the data. So to they have the only purpose how they can publish the research manuscript without regarding the scientific methods, without regarding the research integrity and the intellectual honesty. Further, that's a very interesting issue. Okay, now in this discussion on this publication misconduct, and that's about the helicopter research. Okay, and that's a very interesting aspect of misconduct we have to understand. So in the case of publication misconduct, a researcher goes to developing countries, okay, and conduct a research. Fine, she collects the data and flies back to his or her country and publishes researches without giving due credits, okay, to the local researcher who supported the research work and other research logistics. This kind of research practice is also known as neo-colonial research or parachute research. Okay, so one of the Hungarian Academy of Research Science reveals the fact in a study that 70% articles in a random publication did not include a local researcher as co-author. That's really worst for for this research practices and research integrity. Okay, so here we have to understand this helicopter research and what kind of damage it's doing to the local research development. Okay, of course, when these researchers go, they go to third world countries, okay, developing countries, and they work out on local problems. They collect some data. Okay, so we have to understand they don't involve the local scientific and research development. What they do, they collect data and flies back to their own countries, and there they publish papers. Okay, so what's damaging? It's not giving proper regard to the local scientific research and development, first of all, and first of all, it also is kind of dominance to the to the other world countries. Okay, because we have to decolonize the knowledge. Okay, so in that way, it's not that some people will have the more more resources to publish, okay, or more command over the publications, and they will not include the local resource persons. They will not giving the due credit in their researchers, so they will not promoting the science and development of the local community. Okay, so we have to understand, we have to knowledge should be giving equal representation to everyone. Okay, giving due credits where it is needed. Okay, so when you don't do, you simply utilize the resources for your own purposes, actually you dominate the knowledge. Okay, in terms, so we need to decolonize the knowledge in that sense, and we have to understand that researches are not about only publications. Okay, it's not about name, fame. Okay, they're about to solve the real social problems, and that is the basic purpose of doing science or doing scientific researches. We have to promote the social development. We have to make this human life better. We have to work for the quality of life. Okay, so somehow this kind of helicopter research does not support the local research and development. Okay, it does not really solve the local issues and problems. Okay, so and again we have to understand, even it does not give the due credit to the local researchers. Okay, those who actually help these researchers when they join, when they come to the developing countries, these all local researchers, they support by the logistics, so they must be given due credit, and the local scientific development must be given the due credit in that kind of research development. So we have to avoid this kind of helicopter research, and we can avoid simply by involving local people, local researcher, local scientific communities. Okay, so that any research, when it is published, it is published for all the people, the researchers, okay, from abroad, researchers from the local community. Then only social problems can resolve and research can meaningfully help to everyone. Okay. Now, let's move further to understand what are the ethical regulatory violations in publication misconduct. Okay, so we have to understand the research requires certain kind of certain kind of clarifications and approvals from the ethical communities, okay, committees, and the regulatory authorities. Okay, and it is in this case where research does not follow international or national norms. Okay, sometimes there are national norms, okay, to conduct a research, especially sometimes when you conduct research on animal subjects, or in case of clinical trials or drug trials, you need to have you need to follow the national international codes of conduct, and even you have to follow the ethical norms also conducting those kind of researches. Okay, so when you conduct any research on human or animal subject, you are supposed to follow the international national codes along with the ethical guidelines also. Okay, so when a researcher does not take ethical approval from regulatory authorities and committees, when a researcher does not follow national international norms, okay, or a researcher fails to obtain local, national or international regulatory approvals to conduct scientific researches, okay, such cases involve research on living organisms, drug testing and trials, and institutional permissions. Okay, in all these cases actually we fail to have the ethical approvals, we fail to abide with the local international laws, and they are the cases of the ethical or regulatory violations. So now let's go ahead to understand a major factor why researchers are motivated for publication misconduct, or what are the causes of publication misconduct. Okay, so when we try to understand the misconduct cases, so one thing we observe here, that is for the last 2 decades, 3 decades, there is a pressure of doing more and more researches. Okay, quality researches. Research publication is very important phenomena, we can say, for the institutional images. Okay, their accreditations with certain committees. Okay, it depends on how much research and what kind of quality of research institutions and researchers are doing. So institutional image, even the in the researcher's job, professional jobs are now based on the quality of research, on the number of research they produce. So now they feel the care and job pressure. That's called what we understand by this term, publish or perish. And publish or perish also support, we understand very well, pay and publish. Okay, this idea, pay and publish, right? So when the pay and publish comes, then it also enhance what we have discussed, predatory, okay, publications, okay, predatory publications detected, okay, and these all three ways we can say they cause the some kind of publication misconduct, because we can easily publish with the false data, fabricated data, or plagiarized data, okay, in the predatory journals. They don't mind any scientific guidelines, okay, they simply publish for the money, okay, that's the major factor. These are the causes why researchers are doing this kind of publication misconduct. And then we have to understand there are other factors like ease of fabrication. These are these days technological advancement has made easy to fabricate easily with the data, okay, and for some reasons there are professionals who are doing professionally for they're writing paper, they're manipulating the data, okay, for money. So we have to understand these major factors, okay. So motivation simply sometimes for name and fame, that you want to publish more and more to maintain your respect in the research community, okay. Sometimes it's very easy to fabricate, that's why you commit the misconduct. Sometimes simply you pay and publish, in that way you don't mind even the misconduct, okay. And the major factor is is the career pressure, okay, these days, okay. So these are the major causes and motivation for the publication misconduct. So now let's try to understand, okay, so what are the consequences, okay, what are the bad results after publication misconduct, what kind of institutional inquiries researchers may face, okay. So of course if publication misconduct is caught and proved, okay, then institutional actions are there. You can be suspended, okay, from the position, okay, you can be even terminated, your services can be terminated, okay. That maybe some research agencies may give you some strict approval norms for research practices. You need to submit many clarifications, okay, certificates for the next registration of research, okay. So you may have to go through the additional requirement for research data accuracy certificates, okay. So suspension, termination of the research grants, and the suspension or termination of services as researcher, viewer, editor, or blacklisting of journals. These are the possible bad results of publication misconduct. So what can be the personal consequences at personal level? We have to understand that publication misconduct, if it approves, okay, then it actually diminishes your personal respect, okay. It's a defame for a researcher, and it's where a researcher loses trust in the research community, okay. So it's a loss of personal respect and trust, okay. So even retraction of published research work, you need to write apology, and your time, energy, okay, resources that you used in terms of publication misconduct, they all go they all go in vain, and it all wastage kind of thing, right? So it affects someone's research credibility when you apply to an institution or for a grant. So it all affects your research career, okay, and distrust in research community. And sometimes in strict cases, okay, you have to pay for fines, and you can be even jailed and face some legal actions, okay. So these are the publication misconduct results at personal level. So we have to understand the implications, okay, of this publication misconduct, and they are very serious implications, okay. So with the data fabrication, manipulation, and misrepresentation can really and seriously affect future scientific researchers, okay, because we all know that research is in continuum, okay. It depends on the data supply from the earlier researchers, earlier knowledge, okay, earlier developments. So the research community uses that kind of knowledge, data, okay, for further research development. Suppose if they are getting the wrong information, wrong data, wrong results, wrong researchers, so of course the next level research is also going to be seriously affected. And as we have discussed several times, that serious impact we can see in the healthcare sector, in the medical sector, where that can be really deadly and dicey when a doctor is going to have a clinical trial based on some misconduct, okay, information, or a kind of manual which is prepared on the false information. It can seriously impact the human health, that we have to understand. So misconduct has serious implication. It results in resource, time, and funding wastage, okay. it will produce socially responsible results as harming humans, animals, and environment caused by misconducts in research practices. So it can cause deadly effects to the researchers in the area of medicine, science, and healthcare. So we have to understand two major points over here from so long discussion. Okay, so one thing is that misconduct undermines respect for science. Okay, it creates distrust in scientific community. Okay, so science is respected because of its method. It's a way of proving the reality. Okay, and then it actually presents the reality, and when you commit any misconduct in terms of fabrication, falsification, what you do, you actually misrepresent the reality, or you falsify the reality, and that's serious disregard of science. Okay, and actually you also develop some kind of mistrust in research community. Okay, so these are really bad unethical trends in research that we need to avoid anyhow. Okay, second point we have discussed over here, the honest error and intentional error. Okay, so misconduct when it is tested, investigated, so sometimes some researchers can say that plagiarism is not about falsifying the data, fabricating the data. It's simply not giving due credit. Okay, so it's not that serious in the way. I mean, falsification or fabrication, they do the damage to the research informations. Okay, of course, but we have to understand the intention of the researcher. Okay, and intent is very difficult sometimes to actually prove in some cases, but that's where we require some research ethics and values to develop, inculcate in the researchers. Okay, so when we are deceiving, okay, in the research practices, of course we are doing something wrong. Sometimes by the omission, by the even, okay, even forgetting something, we can commit certain wrong informations, or we can commit misconduct. That's of course wrong. Okay, but we have to understand there is great difference between the intentional misconduct and the honest error. Okay, so now let's move further to understand how we can develop this no misconduct attitude in ourselves, and what kind of research strategies we can adapt, okay, to avoid the cases of misconducts. Okay, so first thing, the very basic thing, we have to understand that all researchers must keep the data record book, or they must keep the data, all the informations, and if it is in a teamwork, okay, then they must have a close check on each and every member. They have to have a critical review of before submitting any trial, before registering anything, before applying for any approval, or before submitting any manuscript in the research paper. So they must have this kind of review checks and and the close view on these all activities. Okay, they must adhere to the established research guidelines. Okay, they should verify research resources and avoid repeating the work already done. Okay, so they should check guidelines. Okay, like we have discussed in the lecture about the Committee on Publication Ethics and WAMI. Okay, so they must understand these guidelines. They must go through the case studies already there, so to increase their research knowledge. Okay, and to understand what kind of misconducts are possible. Okay, so in case of any doubt, a new researcher, a fresh researcher must talk to supervisor, must talk to the seniors in order to understand the research practices very well. So they should follow author, editor, reviewer, and journal publishing guidelines very well to avoid this misconduct. So these are some no misconduct strategies we can develop. Now further we can talk about that supervisors should also take care of the new researchers. Okay, they should give the proper mentoring. Okay, so and researcher must be ready to seek guidance and get clarification in case of doubts. Okay, so we all should maintain research integrity and intellectual honesty, and there should be open communication and collegiality in the team, research team, where the many co-authors are working on the same manuscript, or in the laboratory where all the when researchers are conducting an experiment, they should have a good open communication to discuss each and everything, so that they are not missing any detail, okay, and we should understand the agreements properly, okay. So fair agreements on roles, responsibilities, and transfer of intellectual property rights before the publication to avoid any future dispute, okay. So again, we have to maintain and keep all research records to be countable in pre or post publication inquiries anytime if any doubt occurs in the research community. So you have to respond to the editor, to the reviewers. So you must keep all the data that you have used during the experiment, devices and other kind of records, okay. So to respond very well and reasonably clarify any kind of conflict of interest in the research. So these are the no misconduct research strategies that researchers should learn, and they must develop this kind of research ethics for the research developments. So now we will be moving to discuss certain case studies to understand what kind of misconducts occur in the research practices, and we will be using two resources here. I will be using COPE cases which are there on the website, and I will be using one text namely On Being Scientists. So we will be analyzing 4 or 5 cases over here to understand the idea of misconduct, or what kind of cases are there in practice. So now let's go ahead to understand some case studies, okay. So let's take the first case, okay. I've taken this case is from the COPE website as it is, okay. So these days we see, as I discussed earlier, that institutions are they are working for their image enhancement in terms of research development. So they have to show more researchers, more publications in terms of the scholars working in the institutions, or faculties working for the institutions, okay. So what they do, sometimes some institutions, they pay money to author, okay, for publication fees, and what they do, they say to the authors that to represent the institution in terms of funding or grant, they should show in the publication. So we see this funding grant manipulation in the research publication, okay. So sometimes it is not the case actually. Simply institutions paying money to the author so that author can include the grant and funding from the institution, okay. So this is a case we have to understand, okay. Some academic institutions are paying authors for the name of the institution to be included in the manuscript so that the institution has an increased number of publications in a given year, okay. So the point is that here, how can such malpractices be reduced, okay. Are there any checks that can be adopted via the submission system or by the editorial team to avoid these issues? Of course, these are publication misconduct instances. There we need to have the serious actions, okay. So to avoid this kind of misconducts, okay. So these are some instances I'm discussing over here, what is happening these days in terms of misconducts, okay. So second kind of we have to understand that a paper was submitted in a journal A, okay, and received a revision decision, and some point of following the decision, the author emailed the journal to request withdrawal, citing inconsistencies in the data and subsequent conclusions, okay. So later on, what happened, this paper A was submitted to journal B, okay, and then journal A contacted journal B to explain the duplicate submission, okay, and that the authors requested withdrawal, citing doubts in the validity of their paper's data. That's very serious concerns. So should journal B retract the paper on these grounds? What happens if journal B does not receive a response from the authors, okay, or their institutions, okay. So we have to understand, okay, in any case, journal B must take this seriously, okay, as COPE advises also, and they must ask the authors, okay, about the data check seriously to avoid this kind of publication misconduct. So these are the practices these days occurring in the research practices, okay. So there is another case we have to understand that's also very interesting, listed on COPE website. That's about a preprint publication, okay. One publisher published a preprint paper and given a DOI, okay. Then later on, another publisher published a full version of the paper and given a separate DOI, okay. So, can the same paper be received two different DOIs? That's the case of kind of seemingly misconduct. Okay. So, as for the information, DOI is related to a single resource. Okay. If the URLs or services change over time, for example, the resource moves the same, DOI will continue to resolve the correct resources or services at their new locations. Okay. Can two DOIs be assigned to the same article? In that case, scope advises, since it was pre-print version, okay, with the first DOI, and now the full version of the paper, okay, with the second DOI. Even journal can retain the first DOI, but in case if it is full paper, okay, and it was found that it was retracted paper, so it was published with the second DOI. Okay, so even second DOI is not invalid. It doesn't commit any kind of misconduct in that case, what advised by the COPE. Okay, in that case. So now I will be using some case studies from a textbook known as On Being a Scientist. Okay, so now I will be using text discussion. I will take 3 quick case studies from a text, namely On Being a Scientist. So let's I'm going to discuss some cases from this book On Being a Scientist. Okay, so this is a case, a breach of trust. Okay, very known case. Okay, in the 1998, okay, series of remarkable papers attracted great attention within the condensed matter physics community. The papers, based largely on work done at Bell Laboratories, okay, described methods that could create carbon-based materials with long, short properties, including superconductivity and molecular level switching. However, when other material scientists sought to reproduce or extend the results, they were unsuccessful. Okay, so in 2001, several physicists inside and outside Bell Laboratories began to notice anomalies in some of the papers. Several contained figures that were very similar, even though they describe different experimental systems. Some graphs seemed too smooth to describe real life systems. Suspicion quickly fell on a young researcher named Jan Henrik Schön, so who had helped create the materials, had made the physical measurements on them, and was a co-author on all the papers. So we have to understand how Jan Schön conducted certain experiments, okay, on superconductivity using the organic materials, okay, and 25 articles published, okay, back to back, okay, and in very reputed journals like Nature and Science, okay. But when the other scientists tried the same experiments, they could not succeed, and then they raised some doubt. Okay, in this case, when Bell Laboratories, okay, and then what happened? There was committee, okay, formed to investigate this case. Okay, why it's happening? Okay, so the committee, when asked to, Jan to show the devices and giving the data. So what Shan, replied that the devices are thrown and he doesn't have the primary data, as he has deleted the files because of the data limitations. Okay, so committee did not accept Shan's explanation and eventually concluded that he had engaged in fabrication in at least 16 of the 25 papers. Shan was fired from Bell Laboratories and later left the United States also. In later communication, Shan wrote that even he admitted that he made various mistakes in scientific work, okay, which he deeply regretted. Yet he mentioned that he observed experimentally the various physical effects reported in these publications. Okay, but after this case study, okay, there are certain things which came to notice that one thing, that all the co-authors, they are found negligent in that case. They must have communicated with the Shan. They must have checked the experiment data also. Okay, they must not be so reluctant in the research. Okay, so after this case, the responsibility to the co-authors and responsibility to the reviewers came into notice, and new guidelines were issued, and even so we see the Bell Laboratories instituted new policies for data retention and internal review of results before publication. It also developed a new research ethics statement for its employees. That's an interesting case, okay, interesting case of data fabrication. Let's take the another case, okay, that's the case of a young graduate student, Vijay, okay, who just finished first year of graduate school, and he was applying for the National Science Foundation for a pre-doctoral fellowship. So what he did, he tried to take the advantage of one of his research, okay, which was carried, okay, and then what he did, he just include the authors and submits for research for publication, and he showed that same status in application. Okay, later that that application revealed, and then a lab member who saw the application, he went to report the faculty member to ask about the submitted. Then he informed the faculty member about the same application, okay, that Vijay made, okay, to attract this grant scholarship. Then what happened? Vijay admitted that he fabricated in the submission about that paper, okay, but he explained that his action by saying that he thought the practice was not uncommon in science. So here we have to understand that he was fresh researcher. He must have consulted with the faculty about this kind of fabrication, okay, before applying for this grant and showing this submission, okay. So later on, what happened in this case, okay, and then he was fired from the institution, okay. So cut. Yes. So later on what happened, that faculty told to Vijay to withdraw his application, okay, and he dismissed him from the graduate program. So serious consequences Vijay faced in this case of data fabrication. So what we have to understand, how to avoid this kind of publication misconduct. So we emphasized on how to train the new researchers, where mentor has got responsibility to to mentor very well the new researchers, young graduates, okay, when they go for the research practices, okay. So we can have several questions, okay. Was that harsh action by the faculty members to dismiss from the graduate program? So we have to understand that research ethics is very important, and such cases reveals they reveal the point that we need to be very responsible in terms of the research positions, whether we are the co-authors, reviewers, or the mentors in the research practices. Let's try to discuss in the case, okay. That's also very important, okay. So it's a case of plagiarism, okay. I mean, is it plagiarism? That's also questioning in this case, okay. So Professor Lee, he was writing a proposal for a research grant, and the deadline for the proposal submission was 2 days from now. So to complete the background section of the proposal, Lee copies a few isolated sentences of a journal paper written by another author. The copied sentence consists of brief, factual, one-sentence summaries of earlier articles closely related to the proposal, description of basic concepts from textbooks, and definitions of standard mathematical notations. None of these ideas is due to the other author, okay. Lee adds a one-sentence summary of the journal paper and cites it. So does the copying of a few isolated sentences in this case constitute plagiarism? Second question here rises is, by citing the journal paper, has Lee given proper credit to the other author? So we have discussed earlier when I was describing about the plagiarism, even if you cite anything, look, using the other's material is not a misconduct, but not giving proper source, not giving proper appropriate citation at the proper place is of course a misconduct and commits the case of plagiarism. So in this case, Lee has to Lee had to provide proper citation and to avoid this kind of misconduct. Okay, but this can be, known as soft, plagiarism, but still it's a misconduct we should avoid by these such practices. So let's go back to our discussion. Okay, so we try to understand from these, case studies, okay, which are occurring these days in research practices. So we notice that it requires not only to understand about the guidelines, it also requires active involvement of the all members of the research team, whether it's supervisor, mentor, researcher himself or herself must be trained well, editors, reviewers, publishers even. We all have to take care of the research ethics and values in order to avoid this misconduct, in order to make the ethical publications, okay, in order to avoid this kind of fabrications, falsification, plagiarism. So such issues cannot only be solved by simply, by the technology or by simply, by the, appeals and trials, okay. But such issues require our ethical attention, ethical development in terms of a researcher, okay. Such issues also require to, respect for the science, okay, the regard of science so far developed in terms of, proving the realities by accurate method, exact methods, okay, the way science has developed the respect in the society, and how science actually helps society, because such misconduct seriously damage the the society also, especially in the case of health, medicine and social media. We have discussed that how this kind of misconducts, manipulations and the malpractices can have serious consequences. In the end, we try to understand some recent cases, okay, of publication misconduct using the COPE website source, and we analyze some cases from the text on being scientist. Okay, so these are important references. Okay, based on these, I have prepared this lecture. Okay, these are really interesting references researchers can go through. Thank you.